I work at a kindergarten as a teacher, and I want to share a creepy experience I had at work. At work, there's another building separate from the school that we use as a kind of warehouse. It's a really old building. A long time ago, it used to be the teachers' dormitories. There's a bathroom, a toilet, a large room, probably a dining room, and a number of single bedrooms up on the floor above. It's a wooden building, and when you walk around in there, you can really hear every step. It creaks, and is clearly worn out. It feels like a really old-fashioned apartment. I have to say, it's pretty creepy in there, especially when you're on your own. No one wants to go in there, to be honest, and there are a lot of stories about it. Unexplainable goings-on and sightings. For example, there is a room with a window. No matter how many times you close it, that window, the next day, is always open. There should be no one on the second floor, but people have heard sounds coming from up there. Like the sound of running on the wooden floor. It's not the sound of mice, cats, or any other small animal, they say. Also, at least once or twice a year, some of the kindergarten students ask who the man is in the building across from their playground. When the teachers look towards where the students are pointing, they can never see anyone. Sometimes the kids just outright tell you that they don't want to go anywhere near that building. We staff members choose to go there in a group when we have to. So one day we couldn't use the main school building due to some necessary repair work being carried out. So we had to use the old building. Even though it was daytime, I was creeped out by that building. I really didn't want to be there. I was relieved to hear that I would be accompanied by 2 other teachers. There were so many students to take care of, but later, when the sun was setting, and the other 2 teachers had to go, I was left alone with the children there. Not all the students, I think I only had around 8 left with me, and the others went back with the other teachers. One of the teachers would come back later to help me clean up there. I thought to myself, it's okay, the kids are here, just be brave for them. One of the kids asked to go to the bathroom. Usually they would go to the bathroom by themselves, but since it was a bit spooky in the old building, and the sun was going down, and the bathroom was a little far from the room we were using, I decided to ask all the students if they needed the bathroom, and we all went together. The bathroom had 1 cubicle for adults, teachers, and then some smaller facilities for the children. The bathroom was really creepy. We all went in at the same time and noticed that the adult cubicle door was shut. I thought, oh, this is good. The other teacher's back already. I called out and announced that we were all in the bathroom. Then, from down the hall, I heard the voice of the teacher I thought was in the cubicle. It was pretty shocking. Who's in the cubicle then? I wondered. The door was locked from the inside. I knocked the door. Is anyone in there? I asked. I didn't get a reply. The kids weren't really paying attention, which was good. I didn't think that there would be another adult in here with us. I guessed that it could be a kid in there. It crossed my mind that a kid could be playing a prank. So I knocked the door once more. Then, in response, I got a single knock back. Ah, so there is someone in there, I said. There was no response. Who's in the teacher's cubicle then? I asked. Once again, there was no response. There must be someone in there since I had just heard them knock back. I decided to look through the gap at the bottom of the stall to see if I could see anyone's feet there. I saw nothing. No person's feet or anything. It gave me goosebumps. I decided to get the children out of there. When we went back into the main room, the other teacher noticed the look on my face and asked me immediately about what had happened. I knew that I couldn't say anything out loud because the children were listening and I didn't want to freak them out. Just in case, I counted the number of students. Maybe one was hiding in the bathroom and I just couldn't see them. I don't know, they could have been stood on the toilet or something. I needed to be sure, so I counted the number of students 4 or 5 times. They were all there and accounted for, in the room with me. So who was in the cubicle? I needed to speak to the other teacher. I walked over and calmly whispered to him about the situation. We let the children play together for a while we spoke about what to do next. Could there be someone else in the building with us? Or could it be my imagination? We needed to find out, because if there was someone here, then it would be a criminal matter, and we have a duty of care to the children. If there was someone here and they were hiding, I don't really want to guess at what their intentions were. So us teachers went to the bathroom as stealthily as we could to see if we could catch someone unaware. When we arrived in the bathroom, I instantly noticed that the cubicle door was now open when it once was shut. It must have taken no more than a couple of minutes for me to go and return to the bathroom from the first time. All this must have happened in the space of minutes. No one left that bathroom. The only exit to the bathroom leads down the hall to the room we were all in. And to get to the only exit to the entire floor, you would need to pass the room that we were in. We would have noticed somebody leaving. I know that if there was someone in that building, then I would have noticed them leaving. I have no idea what the hell that was that day, but it seems otherworldly to me, especially if you consider the fact that some children say that they have seen someone in the windows there. I don't like going anywhere near that building these days. I was rushed to the hospital during childbirth. I had to have an emergency cesarean section. The general rooms on the second and third floor were full, and I was told that they had no rooms available. I knew that was the floor for obstetrics. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted my own private room, but none were available. There wasn't even a bed in the shared double rooms available. It couldn't be helped, I guess. I spent much of the first day in a gurney, and in a room they called the follow-up room after my operation. It wasn't the most comfortable place to recover, but on the second day I was offered an alternative. Since you're paying a premium rate, we can offer you a room on the 4th floor. 4th floor, hey? Well, I knew why that might be available. Here in Japan, the word for 4 is awfully similar to our word for death. Some might have even seen it as a bad omen. And hey, if I wasn't in the situation I was in, I might have been inclined to agree, but a private room is a private room, and I wasn't going to turn it down. I was impressed by that room. It was more like a studio apartment rather than a room in a hospital. There was furniture and appliances there. It seemed like a special room. My family could stay the night there, as there was a really great sofa bed, closet, and luxury bedding available. Hell, there was even a shower and a kitchen. I could have moved right in. I think it was about the 3rd night of staying in that room when it started. I had practically begged my family to leave. I just wanted to recover in peace, and I was drowsy. I could hear the voice of a man talking in the hallway. I guessed that it could be some relative visiting the room next door. Was there a room next door? I couldn't remember. It agitated me. Something seemed strange. Despite the pain of my fresh wounds, I went to the door to listen, and that was when I heard something disturbing. It sounded like a load of adult voices sobbing, and then chanting something. There was something so inherently eerie about those muffled, sad voices chanting, something so worrying. Was I just overly tired, or was there something I should be concerned about? Was it my imagination? I decided getting back to bed and getting to sleep wouldn't be a bad idea. I was apprehensive though. Maybe my overtiredness coupled with the drone of the air conditioner and the hum of the electricity made it sound like there was a chanting voice, when really there wasn't. Almost like tinnitus. There's a ringing in your ears, but not a ringing out loud. At least that's what I wanted to convince myself of. I slipped into sleep while trying to separate the occult from reality. Your mind plays tricks. Don't slip into sleep yourself until you've heard the end. I dreamed that a door to my room had opened, and a man who looked like a monk was in the hallway. People in mourning dresses followed him with solemn and pensive expressions on their faces. I followed them down the hall. We entered a room, and there was a baby there, swaddled in a blanket. Then, as if a record skipped, the whole scene changed. Everything I mentioned before was gone, and there was new things to see. There were 2 people in blue coveralls now. They were cleaning the room, the ash from the burned incense. Oh no, that must mean that something terrible happened, I heard myself gasp, and I woke up. It was early in the morning, before the dawn. I was drenched in sweat. I didn't know what it all meant, but a terrible sense of sadness lingered in the room. That dream felt very real. I spent that whole morning on edge, but by the time lunch rolled around, I had calmed a little. That's when I heard a knock on the door, and a voice behind the door say, "Sorry to bother you, we're coming in to clean the room." The door opened, and I saw two janitors dressed in blue coveralls. I didn't know what to do. I got up and I went and positioned myself on the sofa bed. One of the janitors looked over to me and said, "It doesn't look all that comfortable. Are you all right?" To be honest, my wound did hurt. "We might kick up a load of dust here, so maybe it's better to go take a rest in another room." What room do you want me to go to? I thought. What's this? Another room? Is there a room next door? I left my room and took a look around. There turned out to be another room next door. It was the room from my dream. The room that the monk and the sobbing, chanting people had entered. I went in. I tried to relax in there, but I couldn't. I found that my eyes were overflowing with tears that I could not contain nor knew of their origin. A headache followed. The door opened and one of the blue coverall janitors said in a monotone voice, "It's finished." I had to ask, so I did. I asked if the room I was told to wait in, aka the room from my dream, was of a certain importance. He said that it was just a standard room, which was used by the staff and never the patients. I guessed that even if I heard voices yesterday, the rest was just a dream. I hope. It's really weird to think that it was just a dream. There were a few jarring coincidences which made me want to leave. I don't know if something happened on that floor, but I'm just happy that my baby and I were fine, and still are fine. This happened when I moved to the west of Tokyo. The apartment that I moved into was about 2 years old. It was a very ordinary looking place. I lived on the second floor in the last apartment on the left. Back in those days I was free and single. I was working freelance, and I barely left my apartment. I would only leave to go to meetings. It was pretty hard back then, with an unstable income and rent piling up. I was stressed out. I guessed from the outside it looked like I was someone with a ton of time on their hands. I might have even looked as if I was unemployed. I was just perpetually wandering around the apartment block. I was always there. To be honest, I sensed some prejudice about my lifestyle from the landlord from the moment I moved in. When I moved in, I brought some cakes and thought that I'd stop by and introduce myself to the neighbors. You know, let them know that I was home even in the daytime if they needed anything. I guess I hoped that that would make them conscious of my work-home life, and perhaps that would encourage them to, I don't know, maybe keep it down a little while I was working. So I went to the apartment next to mine first. Next door was a couple. The guy was a blue-collar worker, he was in the construction trade, and his wife also was working. They were a really nice couple. They were good neighbors and they never caused me any trouble. I got along with them. Without sounding mean, they were the best type of neighbors you could hope for since they were so ordinary. Next, I thought I would pay a visit to whoever was living downstairs. No matter how many times I went down there, they just weren't home. At first I thought the apartment below was vacant, but something changed to make me think otherwise. The apartment complex wasn't exactly cheap, but noises from neighbors could be heard. I mean, I would always know when someone was watching TV too loudly. I heard noise coming from downstairs, footsteps, and everyday household noises. When I heard this kind of noise, I went down to introduce myself, but no one answered the door. I got the strangest feeling that someone was watching me through the peephole. I mean, I can't be certain, but it felt like that. I can understand if someone is out, but to constantly pretend that you're not home when someone comes to the door is a bit weird, I guess. According to the landlord, the people who lived downstairs were another young couple. The guy was an office worker and his wife was a housewife. It was obvious that they were ignoring me when I rang the doorbell, and that annoyed me. Then, finally, a full week after I had moved in, I saw their door open as I was passing on the stairs. I thought, great, finally I get a chance to see this stubborn asshole. I was surprised to see a timid, nervous-looking man scuttling towards his front door. He wasn't what I expected. As the door opened, I saw his wife standing in the kitchen. She saw me and looked my way. I guess she must have recognized me from the peephole. She was short and plump, with a dated short hairstyle. She was holding a baby close to her chest and she was wearing an apron. I gave her a slight nod to say hello, but I couldn't keep eye contact with her. She was staring at me with a blank expression. On reflection, I now understood why they were reluctant to answer the door. She was home alone with a newborn, and I was a total stranger. I thought that I would just leave them alone. I didn't want to come across like a creeper, and I felt a bit bad for bothering them so much. Life in my new apartment went on peacefully from that day. I was engrossed in my work one afternoon when I heard a thud coming from below. It felt and sounded like someone downstairs jabbed their ceiling with a pole or a stick. A couple of raps came in quick succession. It was as if I was being told to keep it down, but I wasn't making any noise or listening to music. It sounded angry. The floor wasn't exactly thick, so with the power behind those jabs that they were hitting, I thought that before long it would create a hole. The intervals between each blast were getting shorter and shorter. What the hell was this? When I listened a bit more closely, I heard that there were other sounds coming from downstairs. It sounded as if something heavy was being thrown against the wall too. There was some muttering too, and then all the crashing and banging sounds ceased. This all happened on a weekday, at around lunchtime. It didn't sound like a domestic argument, and I guessed that the guy was at work. It honestly just sounded as if it was directed at me, and I hadn't been making noise. Well, the banging against my floor wasn't a one-off, unfortunately. It happened a lot. Sometimes I would hear cupboards and doors slam down there too. The noises from downstairs always happened on a weekday. At daytime, never on the weekends. They never lasted too long, but they sounded very aggressive. I guess because I was the only person working at home, I was the only one who noticed these noises and heard them. I got the strong impression, based on my interactions with the landlord, that if I complained about these outbursts, then I would be further ostracized. I thought that he would think of me as just some young guy who's always at home looking for areas to complain. I knew he would stereotype me as a lazy student, just because I was working in an unconventional way. The noise from downstairs wasn't daily, but it was frequent. The sounds that were coming out of her mouth from down there were really disturbing, like she was speaking some long dead language. It didn't make sense. It sounded as if it was coming from the pit of her stomach, like this guttural sound leaking out through her clenched teeth. Before I knew it, strange moans and screams rose from down below, and the banging and slamming got worse. Enough was enough. I decided to call the landlord and told him about what was going on. Just as I expected, he brushed off my comments by saying, "Well, no one else has said anything, so..." I knew he lived on the outside of town, so I couldn't imagine that he would be interested in coming over unless something was absolutely urgent. I didn't care that nobody else had said anything. I was saying something. I hated his attitude. One day, her noise was really ridiculous, so I went downstairs and pretended to get something from my car. Then I tried to take a sneak peek into their apartment, but their curtains were closed, so I couldn't see anything. Then all of a sudden, it was as if she sensed my presence, because she stopped all her banging and screaming. I learned something while I was down there, that her screams were not screams of anger or irritation, they were just nonsensical, and that really creeped me out. I thought she was a complete weirdo, but I couldn't help myself. From that day forward, I continued to listen to her. I would even hold my breath to try and make out what she was screaming about. I couldn't decipher any words at first. But then after a while, I don't know how many days or weeks, I was able to make out something.
You spoiled brat. Look what you made me do. I could kill you.
I couldn't help but think of that baby she was holding tightly against her chest, and my heart wept. Could this be abuse? I heard other things I dare not repeat, but the gist of it was that she was angry that the baby wasn't eating. Is this why she's been screaming and banging around down there? I knew I needed to report it, but I needed to get my story straight, and at least gather some evidence of what I assumed to be going on down there. I didn't want to cause a fuss if I wasn't going to be listened to, and given the attitude of my landlord, I was more apprehensive than I should have been. While I was mulling this over, a jarring thought burst to the forefront of my mind, and that thought was, why haven't I ever heard the baby crying? I was really worried now. I felt so helpless, but I knew I needed to do something. Then, moments later, I heard a different sound. I crept out of my apartment and looked down from the top of the corridor stairs. A moving truck was idling its engine out in the communal parking lot. I guessed that her husband or the pair of them were moving out. My theory was confirmed when I looked out of the window to see him carrying a cardboard box to the truck. His wife wasn't helping with the boxes, she just stood there staring, an absent stare, beside what I assumed was their family car. Her hair looked oily. She looked as if she hadn't washed for a long time. Her shoulders were slumped, and she seemed to be unaware of her surroundings. She was wearing the same apron I saw her wearing last time I saw her. There was her baby, still pulled tightly to her chest. I couldn't see everything from where I was, but at least the baby looked okay. I wondered if my imagination had run away from me. Back then I didn't know anything about raising a baby or their situation. I saw the baby in her arms opening and closing its eyes. I was so relieved that the baby was okay. I caught a better glimpse of the baby's face, and I was shocked to see that its expression was similar to its mother's, completely blank. Something felt wrong here, but like I said, I didn't know their situation, and I felt really bad for judging them if they were just going through a tough time. Before long, their truck was loaded, and they were getting ready to depart. I don't know why, but I just kept watching them. Her husband called her over to the truck, and she approached. And that's when I saw something that changed everything. When she was climbing into the truck, she bumped the side of the baby's head against the doorframe. I knew that her husband saw it. There was no way that he didn't. I could even see it from where I was. I was so angry in that moment. I began storming downstairs and into the parking lot. As I drew closer to their car, the baby's face was reflected in the sunlight, and its eyes gleamed. The only part of the baby that was moving was its eyelids, and that only happened when she moved her arms. I knew then that it wasn't a baby. It was obviously a doll, and I'm so thankful it was. When I was in university, I was living alone, and I wasn't living in a dorm. I wanted to live by myself, and to do so, I needed to find the cheapest place to live I could. Being a student meant that I had zero money, but somehow I managed to find a place within my price range. I had a part-time job, which helped. I loved the place I ended up moving into. It seemed like a steal. However, the day after I moved in, I felt that something was off. Being in that apartment made me feel down, as if I was really upset. It made my heart feel heavy. I'm not sure if that makes much sense, but that's just how I felt. I would literally cry for no reason. It was bizarre, and I would often end up crying at night. I thought that it could have been caused by hay fever since this happened in spring. I didn't pay it much mind, as I was too interested in starting my new life in a new place. About a week or 10 days go by, and then I became aware of a noise at around midnight each night. I thought that it was a bug, maybe a mosquito, but that wasn't it. Then I thought it could have been a mechanical sound, like that of a fan or a refrigerator. But I knew that that wasn't it either. Then it became clear that what I was hearing was a low, sobbing sound. It sounded as if someone was crying nearby. After a while, I determined that the owner of that voice was a female. Was one of my neighbors crying? I asked myself. I thought that it was strange since the crying started at about the same time each night. Surely no one cries every single night, right? Plus, I didn't think my neighbor was a woman. As the nights went on by, I began to think that the sound was coming from inside my apartment. No matter how many times I searched my apartment, I couldn't find the source of that sound. I remember standing in the bedroom, hearing that sound and asking myself, how much longer can I stay here? It was scary, but I was trying to keep my head. I know that in life, most things have a logical explanation. I just couldn't find that explanation. The mind is a problem-solving device. When it is confronted with an unanswerable puzzle of this nature, then fear begins to settle in. Well, it did for me anyway. I rarely cry. I never really feel down. And I haven't suffered with depression, so this feeling I got when I was in my apartment, coupled with the crying sound, was completely alien to me. I decided that the best thing I could do would be to move on. The energy in that room was too heavy for me. On the day I was moving out, I was carrying out some boxes, and I ran into one of my neighbors. I had barely spoken to the guy before. He stopped, looked at me and said, "You're moving out too? No one ever stays in that apartment long." I asked him what he meant. "In that apartment, about 5 years ago, a young woman died. She was a lonely person." I pressed him for more information because at first I thought he was just messing with me. I thought he mistook me for a naive youngster. So apparently, the woman was in her 20s. She never married, never had guests or spoke of any family. One day, the landlord noticed that he hadn't seen her around, and she hadn't responded to any of his messages, so he went to see if she was okay. And that was when he discovered her. He said that he didn't think that it was a suicide, rather a sudden death. The neighbor said that ever since that apartment has been rented, no one has lasted over a month there. He had so many neighbors ask him about the person crying in the night and if it was coming from his apartment. One former resident described the apartment as cursed. After moving out, I went back to my old self, and life went on for me quite normally. I ended up moving back to my hometown, but sometimes I think about that apartment and that poor woman. This happened when I was in my first semester. It was winter. I was living alone. When I went to bed, I lit my room with a miniature lamp. I brought it from home. When I lived with my parents, I didn't use the lamp much, but in this apartment, it was a real lifesaver. I had a thick curtain on the window facing the balcony to keep the chill out. When that curtain was drawn, it made the room completely pitch black. So if I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, I would be groping around for the switch for this lamp. One night, as usual, I went to bed and turned the lamp off, got into bed and fell asleep. I guess this was around midnight. I wondered how long I was asleep for. I was awake, but I hadn't opened my eyes. I was in a state of blank consciousness, if that makes sense. Asleep, yet awake. And then I opened my eyes. In the area I was living in at the time, it was silent. The miniature light bulb illuminated my room. I checked my wall clock for the time. I could make out the time without having to put my glasses on. It was just after 3 a.m. Even though my mind was awake, my body refused to move. I guess I was tired. I tried to think about what might have woken me up. I didn't have any messages on my phone and there was no alarm set. I had no intention of going to the bathroom, and in recent times I hadn't woke up at this time. I'm a pretty sound sleeper, and when I sleep, I usually sleep right through until the morning. I started freaking out a bit. There was no reason why I felt like this. I guess this feeling is just something innate in humans. When something wakes you from a dream, and there is no reason why, maybe your fight or flight instinct kicks in or something. Well, since it was 3 a.m., I thought that I'd better get back to sleep rather than worry about it. I was doing some deep breathing to get myself back to sleep, and eventually it worked. The next day I spoke to my friend about what had happened. I knew he would want to hear my story since he was into the occult and was seen as a bit of an expert at our university. "Did you want to open your eyes when you woke up?" he asked. Well, I was awake before I opened my eyes, then I opened them. But does true consciousness begin from the moment you open your eyes, or are you awake before that? He replied. I made a face at him, as if it matters which way around it is. He was still thinking about it though. Personally, I have never woken up from a dream with my eyes closed, but that's just me. It might depend, person to person. A reflex somewhere in the brain opens the eyes, and that's how you know you're awake. Eyes open, then consciousness is created, he said. Oh yeah, then what about blind people? I asked. Well, I guess they're in the dark when they wake up, but perhaps their trigger is not visual. Perhaps it's something else. All I'm saying is there must be some sort of cue that lets you know that you're awake. I'm sure they feel air on their eyes or feel the muscles that move in their eyelids, he replied. I thought about this. It was an interesting idea. How do you perceive the moment you wake up? Why not put it to the test then? Try keeping some tape or something over your eyes, and then you might notice the first thing you do when you wake. If opening your eyes is the cue you need to wake up, then you might not ever wake up if there is tape over your eyes, he said. Then he just turned to me and said in a nonchalant voice, I know the reason why deep sleepers wake up in the middle of the night for seemingly no reason. I wanted to come to my own conclusion. Perhaps it was because of the bridge from REM sleep to non-REM sleep, or tiredness. Perhaps you wake when you're in a lighter state of sleep. I couldn't put my finger on the reason. While I was considering it, he spoke again. The reason some people wake up is because someone is watching them. Have you looked outside your window lately? His words were disturbing, yet they seemed to shine some light on my predicament. I couldn't prove his theory, yet I found some truth in his statement. Later that night, I was thinking about what he said, in the dark dead of night. I was considering that there could be someone watching me while I slept. I was lying completely still, too terrified to move, ears attuned to every sound in my house. My room was silent. I fell asleep, and I awoke later in the darkness. My light was still on, but it wasn't bright enough for me to see the clock on the wall this time. My first thought after waking was, someone is outside. God damn my friend for putting that in my mind. I couldn't escape that thought. I had never tried his theory. It would have been so easy to check behind the curtain and look out of the window if he hadn't said that someone was out there. I just wanted to go back to sleep, but my mind wouldn't allow me to until I looked outside. My heartbeat sounded as if it was echoing throughout the house. My bed was warm and the covers were safety, but I slowly rose to my feet. I grabbed my glasses. The air in my room was wrought with tension. I was scared. This wasn't some normal type of fear. This felt primitive, like the natural fear prey must feel in the presence of predators. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. I faced the window. The heavy curtain was drawn shut. My rate of breath increased as I grabbed the curtain. I slowly drew it back to peek outside. I felt the cold night air behind the curtain. My breath fogged up the glass instantly. I wiped it with my pajama sleeve, and I saw the garden outside. The potted plants, the wall, the road, the other side of the wall. The sleepy neighborhood. Unlike my bedroom light, the moonlight illuminated them all. My eyes scanned the garden. They followed the cobblestone path through the lawn to the gate, and that's when I saw someone. Someone was outside. I drew my face closer to the glass. My heart felt as if it was about to burst. The cold air was against my cheeks. The figure was stood by a stone pillar near the gate. It wasn't someone looking to ring the doorbell. It wasn't someone looking to break in. It was just a figure stood by the gate. It stood completely still. It was just staring. He was right. The reason why I had been waking up in the night was because someone was watching me. I never checked outside before. I wonder how many times this happened. How many times had they stood out there? My body started trembling with chills. I was still staring at the figure out there. The clouds must have passed because the moonlight illuminated the figure's face. The face was blank, but I knew it was male. Somehow I had a sense of déjà vu, as if we had met before. Maybe I recognized this person from my school days. I thought that it could be someone I used to hang out with. Now that we were grown up, I felt like I could recognize them. I studied his face, and then it began to kind of glitch out. It shook side to side, like it was a screen. The figure then began to back away from the gate and into the darkness of the adjacent forest. I could hear the sounds of nature rise from the forest. I would have never seen that figure had I not checked outside. I put the curtain back and went back to bed. I felt as if I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I haven't seen the figure again. I'm not exactly searching for it. I'll update if something else happens. My granddad told me that the most important thing you can take while hiking in the mountains is the radio. He showed me his one. It was a small battery-powered one, and it barely weighed a thing. So based on his advice, I got a license for a radio, so I could use it on every trip I took. No matter how many advances have been made in cell phone technology, most modern cell phones cannot hold a signal in the mountains and therefore are unreliable in an emergency. A radio can help pinpoint exact locations for search and rescue parties and exchange information about weather and other warnings. In a true SOS emergency, you want a radio. So this is my granddad's story. He said that he set off climbing into the mountains with his radio. It was summer and he planned a 3-day, 2-night camp. He set off at about 3 p.m. As he was looking forward to camping, he said he only hiked for about 2 hours and then started to set up his camp at around 5. He camped in a place that he had camped in before with some of his hiker friends. He described it as a calm and safe area. He made a fire and prepared dinner, ate well, and drank beneath the fading summer bright night sky. He took out his radio and scanned to see if anyone was in the area. He said that he often chatted with other hikers, and even strangers on his radio. It was a good way to share information and help one another out. The frequencies he used were 144 and 430 megahertz. These are standard for most radios. My grandpa tried to make the range of his frequencies as wide as possible. He was able to receive transmissions from various frequencies. This is an account he heard from his radio that night.
Point, another pass, and well, I guess it's the place, do for me.
Grandpa responded by stating his location, asking for their position.
It's where I am now, around me a lot.
Grandpa obviously couldn't make out what the guy was saying, so he asked again.
I'm at the face, I repeat, face rock.
Face rock? My granddad thought. Then it dawned on him. A few hours from his location there was a famous landmark, and it was a rock which looked like it had a face. He knew the place well, and would leave in the morning to find this person if they needed help. Please confirm, are you by the rock shaped like a face? Should I call in a search and rescue team? Thereafter, nothing but static hissed in response. It was a slightly creepy state of affairs. My grandfather felt that the person who he spoke with was in danger and he thought he should call search and rescue before it got too late. Things were even weirder because no matter how many times he radioed search and rescue, he never got a response. His radio was also suffering significant signal loss, which really stumped him. With little other options, my grandfather turned in for the night, in the hope that he would find the stranded person himself at the rock shaped like a face in the morning. He barely slept that night. Originally he intended on leaving at 6, but he left at 4. He was very concerned. While he was walking, he was trying to get in touch with the stranded person again, and eventually, he got a response.
Still here.
That's great, I'm about an hour's away from you are. Now I need you to stay there, Grandpa replied.
Around. I'm a bit scared.
Do you need a search and rescue team? Medical support? How can I help? Grandpa replied.
It's no good, man, to do.
He said that the voice seemed to be horrified by something and was sounding more and more erratic, so he radioed through to the search and rescue team once more. He connected with them with ease this time. He guessed that this was because he was in a slightly higher location, with better signal. The search and rescue team had reported no missing people or any calls for distress in the last week. They said that they were unable to get a team out there straight away, so they would get a regular helicopter patrol over the area instead. My grandfather now felt that the person's chances of survival were firmly planted on his shoulders. When he heard this, he began to quicken his pace. He finally got to the face-shaped rock and immediately tried to make contact with the distressed person.
Not sure how. It's bad.
The voice replied. Where are you? Granddad asked.
Where you are?
I am just to the east of the face-shaped rock.
It's no good. Pull it.
It seemed as if the signal was a tiny bit better than last time, so he must have gotten closer, he thought. Have you been in an accident? Grandpa asked.
Oh God, help me.
After hearing this terrifying plea for help, Grandpa radioed back to the search and rescue team and demanded more assistance. He would continue to search for this person until they arrived. The face-shaped rock was in a chasm, and a place where you would expect accidents to occur. The voice amidst the sea of static on the radio didn't seem to be in pain though. They just seemed to be utterly horrified by something. He was searching everywhere in that chasm for any sign of life. A rucksack, some footprints, maybe even blood, but he found nothing. My grandfather was understandably exhausted at this point, so he climbed to the top of a large boulder and waited for the search and rescue team to arrive while attempting to make contact with the distressed person.
It's tired.
Can you hear me? Grandpa responded.
I think I can hear you. Close, I think.
If you can hear me, then I'm going to make some noise now. Just come to the sound of the noise or tell me which direction you heard it from, okay? Due to the chasm, any sounds should be clearly audible, even if they were minuscule. So Grandpa hurls a rock into the chasm, and the sound was clearly audible.
Heard it.
Great. What direction did you hear it come from?
I think it's definitely south.
Did you say south? Did he say south? Because that would be really weird, Grandpa thought. If he heard the noise come through the south, then he would be north of my grandfather's position. But if you go north, there's nothing but a cliff face. This was around the time that the search and rescue team arrived, and Grandpa explained everything to them, and they told him that they would take it from there. Since my grandfather was completely drained at this point, he gratefully accepted, and after resting for a while, he began to head back down the mountain. He was in contact with the search and rescue team all the while, asking if they had found the distressed man, but they hadn't. So he was trying to contact him himself.
Something here, so many.
That was the last communication he heard. Search and rescue were unable to make contact or find anyone either. A few years later, my grandfather was telling this story to some of his hiking friends who said that there had been a body discovered at the rock which looked like a face. The victim had innumerable cuts all over their body. It is unsure if these incidents are connected, but my grandfather, he doesn't like to go anywhere near that face-shaped rock anymore. I work deep in the mountains of Kyushu. We are currently building a huge dam. My life isn't great. Thinking of my workplace and my home life moves me to tears sometimes. My mother is bedridden, and my younger brother has some behavioral issues. Both of them live with me in the dorm that the company has provided me. I really want to quit my job, but I can't. I work 11 hours a day and only get 1 day off a week. My monthly salary is 108,000 yen. The dormitory rent is 45,000 a month. Lunch a month is 9,000. There are some strange management administrative fees which are about 20,000 a month. This leaves around 30,000 yen a month to live off, which is about $265. For recreation, I go to an internet cafe about once or twice a month, because it's expensive to get there and back. It can't be helped. I have tried to run away and leave this place a few times. The company cannot be legal. It's like modern slavery. There are so many work-related injuries and deaths, it seems like no one cares. Last month I was working with cement. It was my job to grab bags of cement, open them, and send them off on a conveyor belt. It's a horrible job, but even worse when you have to do it for like 11 hours straight. I opened one bag and noticed that there was something inside. A large, thick envelope was mixed in with the cement. The cement comes from a factory about 20 kilometers away. It's in affiliation with the company I work for. I took the envelope out of the cement bag and put it to one side to read after work. When I opened the envelope later, I found a letter and a kind of rag inside. The letter read, "I work in the cement factory. My boyfriend's job was to put the stones in the crusher. On the morning of the 2nd of February, my boyfriend was loading a particularly large stone into the crusher and fell in with it. I tried to grab him, but it was too late. All I got was a piece of his shirt before he disappeared into the machine. The stones in the crusher were turned an awful red color. Then, they were transported along the conveyor belt to be crushed even smaller and heated to be made into this cement. His body, his bones, his blood is in this cement. All I have left is this scrap of his shirt. The production line was stopped due to the accident, and I was sent to the bagging line. I was forced to pack the cement that included his body. This is how I was able to get this letter in here. I'm writing this letter, hoping, praying. Whoever reads this will reply. I need to know where this cement is going and what it's going to be used for. I'm including my email address. I need you to reply. I don't want this cement to be used in building a house for someone like the director of this company. I couldn't forgive that. Please don't use this cement for something like that. He was only 26 years old. He was kind. He had a strong sense of responsibility, and he made me happy. We only started working for this company to make money for our wedding. I kept saying we should quit because of the pay and the working conditions, but he would always say, "We'll quit soon." I wish I was more forceful. I wish we quit. I had already rented the wedding dress. We were so close. I can't even bury him. There's no body. Our company provided an empty urn. Well, at least I inherited all the things he left behind in our dorm. Please email me. I need to know where this cement is being used, as it will be the closest thing he will ever have to a grave. Whoever you are, please take care of yourself, and please consider getting in touch. I had so many feelings of disgust and sadness. I need to leave this place, but I can't though, because of my mum and my brother. I really wish I could just run away. I'll quit soon though. When I was in junior high school, Chainmail was really popular at my school. My experience began when I came back to the classroom after a PE session, and I noticed something between the pages of my textbook on my desk. It was a thick, old, tea-stained looking envelope. The words on the front of the envelope read, "Open this alone." I was really excited, and I stuffed it into my school bag. I thought that it could be a love letter, so I took it home with me. That night after dinner, I opened the letter in my bedroom alone. The contents of that letter were entirely unexpected. It read, "This is a photo of a student who was bullied to the point where they decided to end it all by hanging. The student has vowed revenge and laid a powerful curse on those who bullied him and the teacher who looked the other way. In fact, that same curse applies to anyone who reads this letter and looks the other way. Nothing but death awaits those who wronged the innocent student who lost his life. Those who find this letter are asked to memorialize the student by lighting an incense stick and praying for his spirit. When the incense burns to ashes, you must offer an apology to the boy and pray for his ascent into heaven, so that his vengeful spirit can be calmed. When this has been done, you must sign this letter and then pass it on to another student who hasn't signed, who no one must notice. You can tell your teachers and your parents, but I cannot guarantee that the spirit of the boy won't be angry, or the curse will be lifted if you do so. I looked at the names on the separate piece of paper inside the envelope. About half of the class's names were written there. The name at the bottom of the list belonged to a girl in the class who barely said a word. The pattern of the names on the list went girl, boy, etc., which is why I was probably chosen by her to be next. There was something else in the envelope. I fished it out. It was a photo, and when I brought it to my eye line, I felt chills race all over my body. It was a dirty old Polaroid. A boy had loads of cotton wool stuffed up his nose. Some of it was white, but the rest was a dirty, earthy, brownish color. His eyes were open but cloudy and pale. He was clearly deceased. Seeing this powerful, frightening image moved me, and I was horrified. I grabbed an incense stick from the guest room and lit it there, in my bedroom, and mourned the poor boy away from the eyes of my family. I was really frightened by that letter, so I did as it commanded and hid it between the pages of a textbook on a girl in my class's desk. I felt a sense of relief to be rid of that awful thing. I noted that one of the names on the list in the letter was the name of my best friend. I thought that it would be safe to discuss the letter with him since he had already seen it. So I went over to him and asked, "Hey, what did you make of that Polaroid? Looked like it was taken on the mortician's slab or something. It was creepy, right?" I wasn't prepared for his answer. "Polaroid? There wasn't a Polaroid. What are you talking about, man?" A month later, the letter had made its way into another class. It became the talk of the playground. Some kids said that they had seen a Polaroid, and others said that they hadn't. And oddly enough, some of the students said that the photo and the letter was about a girl, not a boy. The strange thing was that the girl said it was about a girl, and the boy said it was about a boy. Even in the photos. When I think back on it, the kid in the picture looked kind of like me. This was also remarked by some of the other students. They said that the kid in the picture looked kind of like them. It was never resolved, but it was really weird. I wish I kept that letter to show you. This happened when I was in junior high school. Our school had a new gymnasium built, and there was going to be a kind of concert with students performing to commemorate its completion. I was going to be playing the piano in front of everyone. All the students who weren't involved with the concert were told that they were banned from going into the new gym until after the concert. All of us performers were allowed access to practice in there. The music teacher had set up the stage for the show. It was pretty cool. I decided that I should practice more, so one night after tennis practice, I went to the gym by myself to work on my performance. It wasn't uncommon for kids to be at school until late, so I decided that I would stay till about 9 o'clock. When I got there, I quickly realized that I was going to be alone. No one else was around. This wasn't a bad thing for me because I didn't want to feel self-conscious about making a mistake in front of the other kids involved in the show. On that day, it had been raining from the morning, and it showed no signs of letting up. I remember that the sound of rain was almost drowning my piano out. The rain outside sounded so heavy. Just as I realized how loud the rain was, thunder rang out from above. It was such a loud sound, I remember thinking that lightning mustn't be too far away. Then, as predicted, lightning lit up the whole gymnasium. It was pretty scary, to be honest. The sound of thunder really resonated in there, and the way the lightning lit the whole place up, it made the brand new building feel like a haunted house. Suddenly, I was plunged into darkness. The gym had had a power outage. I couldn't read the music in front of me, so I couldn't keep practicing. I decided that all I could do was wait patiently until the lights came back on. It was so dark, I don't think I could have seen my hand in front of my face. Some sound was approaching. "Teacher?" I called out. My voice echoed in the empty gym. I thought that it must be one of the teachers. They must be here to see if anyone's in here. No one replied, but that noise drew closer. At that point, I realized I couldn't hear the noise of rain and thunder so much anymore. Whatever this noise was, its echoing sound around the empty gym was drowning rain and thunder out. I strained my eyes. I couldn't make out anything different around me. I could see pretty well now that my eyes had adjusted to the dark. No one was in my immediate vicinity, yet I could hear that footsteps sounding noise close by. It terrified me, so I leapt out of my chair and ran to the back of the stage. I guessed that fight or flight must have kicked in. I wanted to get my back against the wall. The footsteps approached, and I felt as if they stopped right in front of my face. Sweat was teeming down my forehead. There was nowhere else to run. I could hear it, pacing around in front of me. I felt something tug at the sleeve of my jumper. I was about to scream the new gym down. Then, from above, I heard the hiss of the floodlights starting up. I looked up, and bright light filled my eyes. I closed my eyes as the brightness was jarring, and when I opened them, I saw our music teacher running towards me with a flashlight in hand. He asked me if I was okay. I can't remember if I was crying or not, but I probably was. He said that I had a really pale face, though. He noticed something was strange with the piano. He said that the music sheets were wet, and there were wet handprints all over the piano. He stared at me and looked at my school uniform, and then at the sleeve of my jumper. It was wet. We had no explanation for what happened that day, but I'll never forget it. I always return to the same thought. What if the lights came on a couple of seconds later? We have a VHF radio on board our fishing vessel, and it's always left on so other ships and boats in the area have communication with our ship, or vice versa. VHF stands for Very High Frequency, and is part of the Marine Mobile Radio Service. VHF radios can be installed on boats or are available as handheld radios. Very high frequency waves are transmitted and received via an antenna on board. Although not required in recreational boats under 65.5 feet long, a VHF marine radio allows instant communication between your boat and other boats, marinas, bridges, and the Coast Guard. It didn't get used all that much, and I personally didn't speak to anyone through that radio, but sometimes I would hear words in foreign languages. I used to listen to conversations with mild curiosity. When I heard the radio on the night in question, I didn't pay it much attention, but I always listened in because I didn't know if the content was relevant or not. While at sea on a big vessel, there isn't all that much to do, so the occasional stimulus is a welcome distraction, especially if you were on watch. Out there in the open ocean, you could hear all kinds of things like songs in foreign languages, and sometimes ships cheered and called out in humorous ways to one another. I enjoyed it. Sometimes you couldn't even see the ships that were using the VHF. It was fun. It was like you were kind of on a voyage. Well, it was to me anyway. My main job on board was watch. Watch differs from vessel to vessel, but on ours it changed every 4 hours. My watch was from midnight until 4 a.m, and then again from 12 p.m. to 4 o'clock. 8 hours a day. This happened when I was on the night shift between midnight and 4 a.m. The radio crackled, and then I heard the voice. I didn't see any ships in the area, so I didn't really know where the voice was coming from. This voice was different to the others I had heard. It sounded like a young woman's voice, mumbling to herself. It also sounded as if she was on the verge of tears, or she had been sobbing. At first I thought I was just hearing things. It's not uncommon to have auditory hallucinations at sea. The issue was I was continuously hearing this woman's voice for about 30 minutes. I know this because I have to update the log every 30 minutes. Usually, I complete my watch solo and I barely say a word to anyone during that time, but something about that voice really creeped me out, so I went to speak with my superior about it. He came over to the radio and listened. He said that sobbing, mumbling voice of some unknown woman was pretty creepy, but ultimately, he didn't care all that much and kind of laughed it off. I was pretty creeped out since I had to return to my post and continue to listen to it. I remember that there was no other sounds besides her muttering cries and the waves. The atmosphere was frightening. There was nothing but darkness all around. It was a strange time. After my watch was finally over, I went to speak with a good friend of mine who worked as a deckhand. I asked him if he ever experienced anything similar to what I had, and he said that he had heard strange and frightening voices out there at night in the middle of the ocean. He says that they don't usually cause any problems, and it's better to just leave them alone and try to ignore it. I'm thinking he was assuming it was something paranormal. It was a very strange and creepy experience I haven't been able to forget. This happened when I was in university. My university wasn't in the same town or state that I lived in, so I couldn't commute. I wasn't exactly rich either, so I began the difficult hunt for a cheap apartment. I went to view an apartment which was in my price range. I was really hoping to get it because I couldn't find anything else quite as cheap as that apartment in that area. I felt like I was onto a winner. I was a little apprehensive, but it was the only place I could afford. When I was shown the apartment, it was, as described, pretty old and dingy. Not amazing, but not terrible. One thing I noticed that was strange was that the bathroom door seemed new. Its paint wasn't as faded as the rest of the paint in the apartment. I asked the landlord about it, and he said that they had to change the door because sometimes it got stuck and it wouldn't open. Fair enough, I thought. The first 3 months flew by without incident, and I was enjoying my own space. That all ended when one night I woke up in the dead of night to hear a scratching sound. I went to go and check for the cause of that sound. I turned on the light and I got out of bed, but then the scratching suddenly stopped. That spooked me a bit, but since it stopped and I was tired, I just ignored it, turned out the light and went back to bed. The next day I was watching TV in the afternoon, and I heard the scratching again. I pressed the mute button and waited. There was the scratching again. I stomped on the floor and the scratching stopped. It sounded like it could be cockroaches or some bug. Thinking back on it, I realized how wrong I was. It was a very strange sound. I heard that noise every day from then on. It was never at the same time. The scratching came in random intervals. I started to spend more and more time out of my apartment because of this. I guessed that those noises were probably still occurring even when there was no one home. One night, when I was in the apartment, the noise was so awful it really got to me. It woke me up in the middle of the night. Another sound began to accompany the scratching sound. It was a gurgling. Whatever was making it seemed to be either frightened or stressed. I got out of bed and began to search for the cause of these creepy noises. Something deep down told me to leave it and go in search of it in the morning. I was now more than a bit freaked out. When morning came the next day, I got up as usual and I started watching TV. I know, I was a hard-working student, as you can tell, huh? I was thinking at this point that I had an infestation in my apartment. I heard the noise and I shot to my feet. It was coming from the bathroom. It was like something was scratching at the bathroom door. I banged on the door hoping it would stop, like the stomp had stopped it before, but this time I was wrong. I knocked on the door, and then the scratching changed to a scuffling kind of tapping. I smacked my palm on the door and it didn't stop. The tapping continued. I didn't like it at all. The tapping grew louder to a banging sound. The thudding on the inside of the door was making the door swell with impact and vibrating through the floor. I knew that it wasn't any infestation. I knew that there was no one on the other side of that door too. Usually there was no one in the apartment building during the day except me and the landlord. I stood there frozen. I was worried that the landlord was going to come up to my apartment and shout at me for the noise. And then it suddenly stopped abruptly. I had to check. I didn't want to, but I needed to know if there was someone there. I opened the door as slowly as I could. I was bracing myself for whatever was going to happen next. I saw long scratches and dents on the other side of the door. I was really scared, and I couldn't stand being alone in my apartment, so I headed down to the landlord's apartment, and when he answered the door, I blurted out what had just happened. He didn't seem that fazed, and the reason for this was revealed. It was as if he had heard my story time and time again. He followed me upstairs so I could show him the scratches. He sighed, and then told me about a former resident. According to the landlord, there was a woman who tried to take her own life by using a poisonous gas in the bathroom. Apparently, during her attempt, she changed her mind and tried to get out of the bathroom. Like the landlord explained at the start of this story, the old bathroom door sometimes didn't open and it got stuck. She couldn't get out. The police's suspicion is that the young woman began to kick and bang her fists against the door to try and get the attention of anyone nearby. Sadly, she was unable to escape, and even if someone happened by, they wouldn't have been able to get inside because her front door was locked. In her final moments, however long or short they were, she must have dropped to her knees and then fell forward onto her stomach. She scratched at the door, leaving marks like the ones I saw that day. The sound I had been hearing was maybe the sound of her scratching. The landlord then said,
"Look, I have a lot of tenants in here, and I tell them the same thing when they realize that an accident happened in here. I mean, I probably should have told you, hey, sorry. Look, the thing is, when you hear the scratching and show her that you noticed and are aware of it, she always stops. Same with the banging. I mean, I can paint over the scratch marks if you want. No charge. How about that?"
I was so angry. He should have told me this before moving in. This wasn't a joke to me. I told him that I was out of there. I went upstairs to get my things. I threw as much as I could into a suitcase and burst out onto the streets. I am now completely free of all mysterious phenomenon, but I often think about that poor woman and the noises I heard in that apartment.
This happened back in my university days, when a friend and I were on our way back from a trip. On the way back, I guess I must have misread the map, or we took some kind of shortcut because we got lost somewhere on the mountain roads. My friend was driving, and I was supposed to be the navigator. It was the one job I had. It was around 8 p.m., but it was already really dark since we were in the shadow of the mountains. I noticed a white truck up ahead, and I said to my friend, if we followed the truck, we would probably get back to a main road in no time. I thought it was a pretty sweet plan because I didn't have a clue where the hell we were, let alone what mountain we were on. We were tailing the truck for a while, and then we realized we were going further and further from the main road and further into the desolate mountain roads. We started to worry as the roads turned to dirt roads, one-lane roads. The truck, more suited to these roads, sped up, and we lost sight of it. It was weird and kind of unlikely for the truck to disappear all of a sudden. There was nothing ahead of us apart from dark, dirt mountain roads. It was playing on my mind but our priority was getting back on a main road. I was flipping through a map with a torch held in my mouth. There was no cell phone coverage. We were going further down the road when I noticed some lights behind our car. I looked in the wing mirror and noticed a white truck behind us. It was the white truck we had been tailing. I told my pal what I'd just seen, and we both watched the truck in the mirrors. We began to get a little creeped out by this. The truck then turned its lights off. Is it even possible to navigate these winding mountain roads with the lights off? I wondered. It was getting really freaky now. I was nervous, and I could tell that my friend was nervous too. I stated the obvious at this point. I think that truck from before is behind us, man. It's following us now. As soon as I said that, I began to sweat. My friend shifted nervously in his seat too. He sped up to test my theory, and the truck behind sped up to catch us. Still, with its lights out. We didn't know what to do. We began to argue about it. It was incredibly tense. Then suddenly, the truck behind us seemed to disappear. It felt totally hopeless. Whoever was in the truck clearly knew the roads. I really wish we didn't decide to follow that guy. We kept going forward on the one-lane road, keeping an eye out for a chance to turn back, sending snappy, bitey remarks to each other about how we could get out of this mess. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the truck swerved into our lane again and slammed on its brakes. My friend reacted in time, and once again, we were behind the white truck. He said, "If we don't do something, it's gonna end bad, mate." This was the worst. I've never felt so stressed out. A moment or two later, we reached a point where the road got wider, and my friend took his chance. We span into a U-turn. There wasn't too much space to turn, so my friend's car kissed the guardrail. On our escape, we noticed points in the road where the truck could have disappeared and appeared in front of us. That answered the question of how it was possible, but we still had the unanswered question of why. Why was this guy doing this to us? We knew that we were on our way back to civilization, so my friend floored it, while I kept nervously glancing over my shoulder to see if the truck was following us. I kept asking him to speed up, but I knew that he couldn't. That truck could pop out of nowhere again, at any moment. So we kept heading down those dirt roads until eventually, they became concrete again. I saw the lights of people's homes, and before long, we came across a non-franchised gas station. My friend immediately pulled in, and we skidded to a halt. My friend ran in and grabbed the clerk by his arm, and frantically explained the situation. He asked the guy to call the cops and for directions to get off of these mountain roads. The clerk didn't seem that interested in our plea for help, so we got him to go outside. My friend then said, "You have to believe us, there's some guy chasing us. Okay then, if a white truck with all its lights off turns up at any second, then will you believe us?" And just as he finished saying that, the truck arrived, with its lights still off. It screeched to a stop a few meters away from the gas station. Then, it slowly turned around and headed back into the darkness. We weren't able to get a look at the driver, but we noticed something. There was some sort of logo and some text on the side of the truck. The clerk at the gas station said, "Oh, now I get you. The guy's from the church, huh?" "What?" "I say church, maybe cult's a better word." I pressed him for more information, and it turns out that apparently the entire mountain is their territory. They own a village, and the leaders and the followers all live there together. I understand that there are cults in Japan, but I didn't understand why that truck was following us. So I asked, and according to the old fellow at the gas station, there are frequent attempts to escape by followers of the cult who change their mind. So the cult are very wary of cars getting anywhere near their village. Their reckless driving and relentless pursuits of anyone who gets close to the village is said to be the cause of numerous accidents up here in the mountains. I remember that the cult featured quite heavily on the news and in the media a few years after, but it seems to have gone radio silent since. I guess that guy who followed us was a lookout for escapees, or for families trying to rescue their loved ones or something. It was a very creepy experience.
This happened when I was a college student. One of my female friends told me that she had had some trouble with someone peeping on her. She said that the voyeur was staring at her from an apartment in the building across the street. She said that it had been happening for the last couple of days. I told her that it was awful, and I wanted to talk to this creep. I went over to her place so she could show me what she was talking about. Her dorm is behind an apartment building, and her window is clearly visible to the apartments. There is a parking lot which separates the two buildings, so there was a little bit of distance there. She took one step towards the window and said,
That creep is watching me again.
I looked out the window and I couldn't see what she was talking about at first, since my eyesight isn't the best, but when I looked closely, I saw that there appeared to be a guy looking towards her window. His apartment was a couple of floors higher than her dorm. He looked like he was sat down. "Whoa, this guy's staring right at us," I said.
I know, right? Like I said, he's been doing it for the last 2 or 3 days. He really creeps me out.
I imagined that the windows were closer and I would be able to shout at the guy, but since there was a bit of distance there, I couldn't yell at him. I waved my hands around and gave him the finger, but he didn't seem fazed by that. He just went on staring. "Shall I go over there and tell him to quit looking at you?" I said.
Please. Thank you. He freaks me out. I'll keep the window closed and the curtains shut for a while,
she said. I stayed over her apartment that night. It was pretty nice. I woke up in a good mood, and I thought that I'd give the guy the benefit of the doubt because I didn't know if there was some reason why he was always looking out of his window, but when I saw him staring at her window every single time I went over to visit her, I started to get really angry. He would even do it at nighttime. He left his lights off so we didn't see him, but I knew he was still sat there watching. The following morning, instead of going over there, I decided to call the police. I said that I wanted to complain officially since he was freaking her out so much. Then the next day the curtains were closed, and I was happy. I was a little disappointed that I didn't make the call sooner though. She was relieved. It turned out to be a pretty sweet situation because we started dating. It had been about 2 to 3 months since the peeping incident, and things were going great. Then one night we got a knock on our door. It was the police. They told us that the man across the street who was staring at her had taken his own life. I was shocked, yet I couldn't figure out why they were telling us this. We let them continue. It turns out that the man had been dead for a while. The whole time we had been complaining of him staring at her, day and night. He was dead. From the view of her window, it looked as if he was sat by the window, where in reality, he was hanging suspended from the floor. When I heard this, I was truly disturbed, and I'm sorry to share this with you if it upsets you. It really affected my girlfriend. She said that she couldn't stay in her dorm that night. I got us a cheap hotel for the night. She was scared to sleep with the lights off that night, and the nights that followed. The next day we were back at college, and she told the story to one of her close friends. Her friend agreed that it was a frightening experience and understood why she was so visibly shaken. She asked why she came to class that day, and my girlfriend said that she didn't want to be in her dorm. She said even when she was getting her bag ready for the day of classes, she still felt as if someone was watching her. Her friend paused, and then asked a question, which terrified us both. "If you two complained about this guy peeping, then who closed the curtains if he had been dead the whole time?" We were shaken up by this. We had to call the police again and make another report. I was told that someone would be in touch. Later that night, the officer who took my complaint called me back. He said that when he called at the man's apartment, no one came to the door. He said, "Are you 100% sure that the curtain wasn't closed from the start? Maybe it was just open a crack." I said of course I was sure the curtain wasn't closed. That's how we knew he was looking at us. He asked me to check this with my girlfriend. And I thought, we called you to make a complaint about peeping, not about a curtain being closed. My girlfriend agreed, it was definitely open. The officer said that he would look into it, but we haven't heard anything back. It makes me kind of nervous because if our memory is correct and the curtain was open, then someone in that apartment closed it. And that someone might have seen me on the phone to the cops after I was waving at them and flipping them off. I really just hope that somehow our memories are wrong about the incident. I really doubt it, though. I'm really worried that someone will come to my girlfriend's dorm when I'm not there. This happened when I was in high school. I think I was in the second year. I went on a school trip. We were in the middle of the woods. I remember that at night, I could hardly see a thing. We were having regular lessons in one of the log cabins, and it was the last day of the trip. Do you remember when you were a kid and you would go on trips like this? All the rules go out of the window on the last night you're there, right? Things like staying up all night and talking don't seem as bad as the first night. I usually love nights like that, but I didn't love that night. There were about 7 of us, and we were telling each other ghost stories. Our cabin faced the woods, and it felt like there was nothing but us, the sounds of the forest, and the darkness. The scene seemed perfectly set for scary stories. Some of the kids made excuses and headed for bed early, once some of the scariest stories started to come out. Eventually, everyone became too tired, and they all just ended up falling asleep, leaving only me awake. Being awake in the dark after listening to all those scary stories was pretty unnerving. I was pretty scared. I remember that it was raining that night, and that I was listening to the sound of rain falling outside, hoping that it would send me off to sleep. I thought that it would only be a matter of time until I was asleep, but then I noticed another sound accompanying the rainfall. Footsteps. I had been alone for about an hour. I mean, the only one awake for about an hour. It just felt like I was alone. I suddenly remembered something I didn't want to remember. A few days ago, some of the seniors on the field trip mentioned that our cabins were allegedly haunted. They said it as if it was a joke, but in the dead of night, when you're all alone with your thoughts, it seems very far from a joke. I thought that I should just lie there, still, and think about something other than those ghost stories. I shut my eyes and I tried to sleep. However, the more I tried to sleep, the more I couldn't sleep. I was getting so freaked out, I was considering waking someone else up. The footsteps seemed to have stopped, and I was grateful for that, but when I looked up, I saw something that I wish I hadn't. A pure white face was peering into the cabin through the window. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could do little more than to pull the blanket over my face and hide from that face's gaze. I closed my eyes and prayed not to see it again, but that blank, expressionless face was still there watching me when I opened my eyes. The rain continued to fall, and I once again turned from the horror at the window. I thought that sleep would never come. I awoke later to hear the sound of my friends in the cabin laughing. The face was no longer at the window. It was replaced by the bright sunlight. Our school still goes on trips like that to the cabins in the woods, and people at our school, in the lower years, speak about seeing a white face at the window. Seems like whatever I saw out there is still out there. This happened about half a year ago, when my friend called me up and asked for my help to move apartments. He said that in way of a thank you, he would treat me and a couple of other friends to sushi for dinner. Of course, since we were good friends, I said yes straight away. He was moving into a corner apartment on the first floor of a 2-story building. The kitchen was there straight away as you went in, and there was a toilet and a bath in separate rooms, and the living room and the bedroom were a nice size. That night after moving him in, us 4 drank alcohol, ate sushi, and slept on the floor. In the morning, me and the other 2 guys headed back home on the train. I remember one of them said, "Hey, did you see that shrine next to his building? Like, literally next to his apartment? I bet his dumb ass gets haunted." Yeah, I didn't forget those words. I saw my friend again for lunch, and I spoke to him about his new apartment. I asked how it was going. He said he was pleased with the location and the size of the place, and then he just trailed off. "What's the matter, man? Something weird going on there? Nosy neighbor. Hey, don't tell me the place is haunted or I might never come back, I said.
Well, yeah, something strange is actually happening. I keep finding long strands of hair all over the place.
It's probably from all the babes you're bringing over, right? I joked.
Yeah, I wish.
No, it's probably from outside. You got it on your clothes or something. Hair is a weird thing. You never really notice when strands of it are in your house and they're not your own. Think about your own home right now. I bet there's some strands of hair in there that aren't yours. So I told him not to worry about it. So a few weeks go by without issue. And then one day we all noticed that there seems to be something up with our friend. It's like he was overly tired all the time. We asked him what was going on, because it seemed kinda serious. He said he would talk about it off campus. We were at university, by the way. So that night, me and the two guys who helped him move in met up with him at a bar so he could tell us what was going on. We were all drinking again, and when the mood was right, one of us asked, "What's happening, man?"
Guys, I don't know if you'll believe it. I can hardly believe it myself. You know I told you about the hair before, right? Finding these long strands of hair that didn't belong to me. Well, it got worse. You told me that the hair was probably coming from outside, right? Well, if that's the case, then the hair might be different sometimes, right? Different lengths. Well, the hair in my apartment is always the same length. At first, I would find them on the floor by the door. You know, usual places that one would find hair. But lately, this hair has been turning up in different areas, like everywhere. It's in the bedroom, it's in the sink, it's even in my cups. I'm worried, guys. I don't like being alone in my apartment anymore. I don't know what's happening. It's not my hair.
I guess that me and my friends were kind of doubtful at first. Surely, if you look for similarities and, try and join up dots that aren't there, then you'll come to a conclusion like this, I said.
Nah, man. Nah, that's not it. Seriously, there's something strange going on.
He said it with such a serious look on his face. I had to take him seriously. Then one of my friends suggested that we all head over to his apartment to check it out. To my surprise, he replied,
"Yeah, let's go. You'll quickly see what I mean."
When we arrived at his apartment, we were lost for words. There was hair everywhere. In the sink, in the bath, in the toilet, in his room, all over the place. This was weird. Someone suggested that we should take a closer look at the hair to see if it was all the same length and the same color. I was freaked out yet excited. So there we all were, scrabbling around his new apartment, plucking up bunches of this phantom hair. We must have looked pretty odd. We picked up every strand of hair we could find, and we put them on some sheets of white paper on his table. We could quickly eliminate some of the strands of hair, as they looked short enough to belong to him. The rest, though, weren't his at all. When we put all those strands of hair together, it was as if a chill passed through the apartment. One of my friends said, "It's all the same. It must have come from one person." We were all silent in agreement. I've never seen a ghost, and I've never had any kind of paranormal experience, so my mind didn't go in that direction at first. I saw how much this had affected my friend. He was practically trembling at the sight of all that long hair before him. Then he asked, "What should I do?" "Well, I don't think you're haunted, man. I mean, does that make you feel any better? Hair is physical, and it must have come from someplace. There has to be some sort of logical explanation for this," my friend said. Oddly, that seemed to calm our buddy down. I guessed he was more worried about spirits than people. It was pretty late, and we all had class the next day, so we were about to call it a night. One of my friends needed to use his bathroom before heading out, so he went in, and as soon as he entered, he came rushing out. His face was a ghastly shade of white. He didn't say a word, he just pointed. There, on the floor, were thick bunches of black, tangled hair. We hid out at an all-night restaurant. None of us wanted to be anywhere near that apartment. I will never forget the chills which raced up my spine when I saw that hair on the floor. Once we calmed down a little, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. There was no way 4 people looking for hair would have missed such big bunches of it on a white bathroom floor. No one else had entered the apartment but us, so there went the theory of it being brought in from outside somehow. There was seemingly no explanation. The 3 of us, who didn't live in that apartment, were full of fear and excitement. We stayed in that all-night restaurant until the sun came up. No one wanted to force our friend to go back to that place alone. In the end, he stayed with one of the guys, and we agreed once we were all well rested, we would go back and check over his apartment. I woke up later that evening and read a text from one of the guys. We were all going to meet up at that same restaurant at 7 p.m. to figure out our next steps. Once everyone was there, we decided to go check over his apartment. When we got there, the lights were still on, just how we left them. He unlocked his door, and we were in. We were petrified as we crossed the threshold. There were a few rogue strands of hair by the door, but not a great amount. We pushed forward in silence. Hair was everywhere. We saw hair in the bathroom, in the same position it was the other night, plus much more, strewn all over the apartment, in the kitchen, hallway, and living room. No one should have been able to get into his apartment, since that night we were all there. Inwardly, I was asking myself if I was dreaming as we paced around. It didn't feel real, like I wasn't part of reality for a moment. We checked everywhere, and as we looked around, we saw those ownerless strands of dark, wiry hair. Then, he let out something halfway between a sigh and a scream. The atmosphere was unbearable. I was terrified. We asked him what was wrong, but he didn't say a word. He just slowly lifted a finger and pointed it towards the living room. I followed his finger, and it was pointed towards the frosted glass windows to his balcony. There was nothing in the upper half of the frosted glass window, just his clothesline, with a hanger, dancing in the breeze. This can't be what made him speechless, I thought to myself. Then I looked lower, and I saw what he had. There was a shape. A long-haired woman was sat on the floor of his balcony. She was dressed completely in white. The second I saw her, I knew where the hair had come from. This is the horrible thing. I cannot tell you for certain that she wasn't a ghost, or she was a human. All I can tell you is that when I saw her, I experienced intense dread and fear. And I couldn't even see her all that well. Stranger still, no one screamed. We all just stood there, in horror, pleading that the phantom woman did not notice us, yet believing deep down that she did. No, instead of screaming, we just silently backed out of the room and the apartment. After that, our friend stayed with us for different periods of time until he could move out of that place. We had many opportunities to go back to his place and help him collect his things, since he was adamant he wouldn't go alone. I suggested we try and purify the place, so we put a bowl of sake in the corner and a dish of salt in another corner. One time we went back to get some of his things, we noticed that the salt had solidified and the sake had turned a dark color. This may have been due to humidity, or perhaps that mysterious woman. And of course, there was hair. Still, everywhere, in that apartment. My friend moved away, and has no issues to report. We never found out what was going on with that apartment. But I don't think it was a coincidence that a shrine was close by. I went fishing with my friend just outside of Tokyo, by an area close to the Shiromaru Dam. It's a little tricky to get to the fishing spot, or even find it. It's really a spot only the locals know about. We arrived at night, and the plan was to fish until the sun rose. We were going to catch as much as possible. But once we set up all the gear, I didn't much feel like going hell for leather all night. I just wanted to relax, so I set up my rod with a bite alarm, and I just chatted with my friend. I got a bite. I raced to my feet and snatched up the rod, expecting a battle with a big fish. I was surprised to feel no pull. Was the line entwined in the weeds, or did a fish get lucky and make off with my bait? I wondered as I began to reel the line in. It felt like something very delicate was on the line, or was attached to it. It didn't seem like it was in the weeds. I reeled in the line for another 30 centimeters or so, and I got the shock of my life. There was a large amount of human hair attached to the line. I looked over at my friend who was watching me, and his face was frozen in a silent scream. I instinctively threw the rod to the ground. I didn't want to lose my expensive fishing rod, and it was being pulled into the water, so I just cut the line and watched it disappear into the murky deep. It was still long before dawn, and my friend and I didn't feel like fishing anymore with that down there. We decided to get the hell out of there. On the way home, we were discussing what had happened with the rod in the car, and before we knew it, we were sharing scary stories that we heard of or we read. This actually helped to get rid of some of the tension in the car that we shared. We were now thinking of the hair on the rod as a story rather than something disturbing. I mean, of course, I was still going to go home and report it, but I couldn't really do anything until we got home. We were still out in the woods. I was telling a scary story I had heard, which I thought was a really good one, and when I got to the punchline or the payoff, I was surprised because my friend didn't react, and he hadn't said a word. "Hey, I'm driving here and you're sleeping. At least you can do is listen to my story, man. I'm tired too." I was mad at him, so I looked over at him, and I was annoyed to see that he was still awake. But then I looked at his face, and his face was really pale. He was staring out of the passenger window. "What the hell is up with you, man? You're freaking me out." "Is this a prank?" I asked. "There's a woman out there. She's standing on the side of the road," he replied. We were still surrounded by the woods either side of the dark roads. "What's she doing out here this time of night? Where is she?" I asked. "She's always there, no matter where we go, man. She's just standing by the side of the road watching us," he mumbled. "What are you talking about?" "At first I thought I was crazy, but I've seen her 7 times now," he said. I still held out hope that he was pranking me, so I kept an eye on his side of the road. My spine froze when I saw a woman stood by the road up ahead. The car was fast approaching her, and just as my friend said, she was stood there, staring at us. I looked at my friend and he just silently nodded at me. We drove for miles in silence back to town, and I saw her again and again. I don't know how many times, maybe 20. I dropped my friend back at his house. I watched him in the rearview mirror, and he looked really nervous and timid. I got back to my house, dumped the fishing gear inside, and locked the doors as fast as I could. I went upstairs, and I was too scared to take a shower. I just got into bed. When I got downstairs in the morning, I saw my mum, and she was looking concerned. "Can you explain what the hell that is in your cooler?" she asked in a stern voice. "I didn't catch anything, I don't think. I don't know. Why?" I said. "You brought back something weird. Go see for yourself. You better deal with that, because I'm not touching it." I walked over to the cooler and saw the fishing line I had cut. That dirty line entwined with that jet black hair. That line that I thought sank was staring at me in my home. I have no idea how it got there, and I'm almost certain my friend didn't prank me. It's a mystery. It scared the hell out of me. I was told this story by an acquaintance. This happened while he was working in Tokyo. He was working later than usual since it was the end of the financial year, and a lot of different departments were staying on late, including his. And because his company had managed to get everything in order, his boss decided to take the team out for some drinks. After getting suitably drunk, he was only just able to make it in time for the last train home of the night. The only issue was that it stopped a few stations away from his home. The following happened as he was on his tipsy way home. It was a quiet night, and there was a pleasant breeze in the air. Although it would usually only take about 10 minutes to get home from the station, he said that he needed to find a bathroom, so he walked through the local park. He said that as soon as he entered the park, he heard something, a muffled, sobbing sound, the sound of a woman crying. In the park, opposite to the toilets, is a row of benches. My friend knew that he would likely have to pass by whoever was sobbing to use the facilities. As he drew closer, his eyes could confirm what his ears had told him. She had her head in her hands, and she was gently rocking back and forth. He said that he was worried about the woman, but first things first, he needed to use the bathroom, and fast. While he was washing his hands, he said that he could hear her, sobbing on one of those benches. Now, my friend was not the type to be overly sympathetic, but he said that he stopped and was a little concerned for her. He called out from afar and asked her what the matter was. Then, when she offered no response, he approached her. "Are you okay?" he called out in a soft voice as he edged closer. At the very moment he did this, the woman shot to her feet and produced a sharp blade she had hidden. She held it overhand and started screaming and walking towards him. He said that she screamed the word chest and began to run at him. She was smiling at him. As she charged towards him, the knife slashed within a hair's breadth of him. Without thought, he struck a defensive blow to the crazed woman. His years of karate lessons had served him well. He was able to get her on the floor and get a safe distance away. She scrambled to her feet, then ran for it without looking back. My friend was able to get home safely. A couple of days later, he got a newspaper on the way to work and read a story about a woman who tried to attack other pedestrians. The incident was described as a thrill killing. He said he knew it was her before he saw her mugshot, but when he saw her smiling like she did before she lunged at him with that kitchen knife, he got goosebumps. This happened to me a few years ago, when I was 22. At the time I was living in a low-rent, single-person apartment. It was an old building, but it was in a convenient location. I knew right from the start it was not the safest place to live. There was enough to like about the place though. I didn't have to share a bathroom, there was a bus stop nearby, and it was close to my friend's place. There was also a 24-hour supermarket right behind the apartment block, so I didn't really care how old it was. It was big enough for me, and I liked it. Plus, there wasn't much choice at the time in my price range. So the place and the rent were good, but now let's talk about the bad point. The residents. In short, a lot of strange people were living there. They weren't doing anything specific to me, they just made me feel uncomfortable. I was still able to live my life and have fun though. Oh, occasionally bikes would go missing from the car park area, which sucked. On one winter's night, things escalated. I had some friends over for dinner. I was making nabe. We had a big pot on the table, and we all dived in. It was awesome. My friends said their goodbyes as I was clearing away the bowls, and after I heard my front door close, I heard one of my friends utter a small shriek. Of course, I rushed out to see what was wrong. My friends looked agitated. They were whispering and mumbling to each other. When I asked about what had happened, my friend just replied, "Have you had any trouble with anyone peeping?" I forgot to mention that my apartment block was built facing the back of another apartment block. so my front door faced the balcony areas of those apartments. My building and that building were separated by a small parking lot. So my friend said that there was someone staring into my apartment from the opposite apartment in that building. Of course, it's not that common to see someone look into your home with a passing glance, so I was eager to give this person the benefit of the doubt. I thought that my friends were overreacting. Sure, the people were weird around here, but I hadn't had any trouble, so I kind of just brushed these comments off. After a day or two, I forgot about the incident completely. About a week later, when I was coming home from work, I think it was about 10 p.m., I was stood in front of my door, digging around in my handbag for my keys. I casually gazed around and noticed the apartment opposite mine. The curtain was drawn, but it wasn't a thick one. It caught my eye because it was light blue. I looked away, and a second later, my eyes were drawn back to the curtain. There was now a man wearing glasses peering at me. He had pulled the curtain back just a little, so that most of his face was still hidden. He was watching me. He was looking at me for longer than I expected, and for longer than is normal. He was really studying me with his eyes. I caught eyes with him and he just glared at me. I hated it. I grabbed my keys and hurriedly entered my apartment. I called my friend, the one who noticed him from the other night. I asked her in more detail about what she saw. So it turns out pretty much the same thing as what I saw. Some strange guy hiding behind a curtain, undressing her with his eyes. She said that she could only see one of his hands, and that his right shoulder was shaking in a back and forth motion, but I didn't really know what she meant. I was upset, and she was trying to calm me down. I hadn't ever experienced anything like that before. I called my partner at the time, since I was creeped out, and told him about what had happened, and he said, "Oh, that guy! Yeah, when I was in your kitchen, I saw someone outside your kitchen window. That guy wears glasses, right?" I gasped when he said that. I got angry at him and asked him why he didn't say anything at the time. He said that he did, but I just didn't pay attention. That sounded about right. I was on the verge of tears at this point. Because of this creepy guy, I pretty much had my boyfriend at the time move in with me. My boyfriend was an okay guy, but he wasn't the one. I couldn't let him know that, though. I kind of used him. Well, there's no kind of about it, if I'm being honest. He was just a decent enough substitute for a guard dog. Whenever he wasn't there, I would get really scared. I moved out as soon as I got a chance. And so far, I haven't had any issues in my new place, thank God. It was a really creepy thing that happened to me, and it made me realize that women living alone are always close to danger. God, what a bitch. This is a story from my student days. I think it was about August time. We were staying on a small island. It was a school trip. It was on this remote island where we would dare each other. We were about 100 meters above the sea level on a small mountain. This island was partially destroyed in the war. You could see scars of the past all around. We were searching around on the mountain for war relics. One of my friends found a helmet in the bush. The island was full of debris. Earlier that day we were told that there were air raid shelters on the island. We wanted to find one and see who would be brave enough to go in. We waited until it was dark. It was perfect. We climbed up close to the summit and found what we were looking for. There was a huge air raid shelter. There was a clear path leading down the mountain. We approached the air raid shelter and felt cold air spilling out of it. It was the perfect setting. Everyone would start off with a candle at the bottom, and then they would make it to the top, wait for the others, and then we would all enter the air raid shelter together. A bunch of us were told by some of the seniors to go and hide in the bushes in different areas alongside the route up to the air raid shelter. And whenever we saw a light coming up the mountain, we were to make scary noises and shake the trees to scare who had taken on the dare of entering the abandoned air raid shelter. We went in groups so that we wouldn't know where people would be hiding. I saw the last group go by, and when that happened, we were all supposed to head back to the air raid shelter. I must have made a mistake because when I got to the air raid shelter, there was no one in sight. I didn't have a candle or a flashlight, I just stood there in the dark on a mountain. I felt as if I had been left behind.
I didn't know how to get back down because it was so dark. I was at a complete loss, but then I heard what I thought to be the sounds of people coming from inside the air raid shelter. No voices. It just sounded like someone was walking around in there. And then I noticed something. I couldn't see any light coming from in there. Even though my eyes had gotten used to the dark, I couldn't see a thing. So that meant that there was someone in there, walking around, with no flashlight or candle. There was nothing but rubble in there. How would anyone know where they were heading? I thought about this as the footsteps sounded as if they were heading my way. My body decided before my brain to hide. It noped me right out of there. Fight or flight, you know? I hopped behind a nearby bush and ducked for cover. When I heard the footsteps approaching, I made a break for it down the mountain. I tripped and rolled about halfway down. I was covered in scratches and bruises. A flashlight shone into my eyes and I panicked. Luckily, it was one of my friends. They were all looking for me. I asked if any of them had been looking for me in the air raid shelter, and he said no. He said they all pretty much quit the dare after hearing the same footsteps I had heard. Who can blame them? To be honest, we were really lucky that none of us got hurt. I could have broken my neck falling down that mountain, or got impaled on something, not to mention whatever or whoever was in that air raid shelter and whatever their intentions were. Anyway, since I didn't technically do the dare, I was tasked with cleaning the place up. We had set up a load of lit candles near the entrance of the air raid shelter, and we were supposed to pick one up and enter with them. I had to go and get all these candles, as we didn't want anyone to know that we were messing around up there. I really didn't want to, but I went back up the mountain, half expecting my friends to start shaking trees and making creepy sounds to put me off. But thankfully they didn't. I guessed that they weren't still here. I reached the air raid shelter and felt that cold air once again emanating from it. I wanted to grab the candles and go, before I heard any more footsteps. I searched around for them, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I'm guessing some park ranger or someone picked them up, but I think it was the owner of those footsteps who found them. We didn't dare each other many more times after that night. I think we were closer to danger than we thought.
I had just moved into my own place, not long after graduating from high school. I went to study in a technical school outside of my hometown. It was the first time that I had lived by myself. It was there that something very creepy happened to me. My mum helped me pick the apartment. She wanted to make sure it was a safe place to live. I'm the sort of girl who has lived a sheltered life, and my mum is a worrier. You're so close to school, everyone will be able to see you, and you'll be in the public view, she said. Sometimes her overprotection is annoying. I had my own anxieties about moving in, but overall, I was excited by the freedom of having my own place. Several days later, my TV arrived. I ordered one. Not a very big one. It just took one person to deliver it. The delivery man brought it to my room. I was like, oh shit, what am I supposed to do with this? Actually, looking back on it, it was pretty embarrassing. I didn't know how to wire in or set up a TV, and I still don't. The delivery man looked at me for a moment and asked politely, "Do you need some help?" I was so grateful. I invited him in. He seemed like an expert, and the TV was set up and installed in no time at all. I blurted out, "Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much." I was really grateful for his help. The next day, the doorbell rang. I went over to the peephole and had a look. The guy who installed the TV was there again. "What are you doing here?" I wondered. A panic stirred up inside of me. I thought I'd just ignore it. I pretended to be out. From then on, he rang the doorbell every day. I was really getting frightened now. He was there every day. It was horrible. Sometimes I knew he was there without him ringing the doorbell. I know you're in there. I didn't say a word. I just kept ignoring him. I mean, what else could I do? He was really creepy and he wouldn't go away. And I was in there all by myself. I was just praying that he wouldn't start kicking the door down. After a while, it was silent. I was wondering if he went away. So I crept over to the peephole. "Ah, you can open the door now," he said with a smirk. After this incident, I went to one of my college friends' apartments as often as I could after college. I'm sure I was inconveniencing my friend. They kept asking me what was wrong, but I really didn't want to talk about it, so I just dodged the question due to my meek personality. I wanted to go back to my room, but I also wanted to take my friend with me just in case. I didn't know how I would react if that guy was there. When I finally explained what was going on, they told me that I was overreacting, and she said that my reaction to him installing my TV might have been what spurred him on. Maybe he interpreted my gratitude as affection. But a man like that should know not to bother a young woman living alone so much. He shouldn't do that. After a while, he went away, and I haven't heard from him since. But I do get frightened every time I hear the doorbell. Please, be careful living alone, ladies.
This happened in springtime about 15 years ago. My hobby is mountain climbing, going from one mountain to the other. I made a plan to hike for 2 days and 1 night. Here's the route. The red line was my hike. I decided to take 4 days off work as holiday. You know, just in case. Here's also the Google Maps location, just in case any of you get curious. I don't recommend it though. I planned to stay in a tent overnight. Unfortunately, I left a little later than I had hoped, at 8 a.m. And by the time I had finished climbing the first day, I made a campsite around 2 p.m. and relaxed. It was great, but a little cold. So I decided to make some dinner, and I climbed into my sleeping bag. I must have dozed off because I woke up and it was dark out. I heard the sound of some shuffling around my tent. Something hit my tent several times.
Sorry.
I heard a male voice murmur. That was all I heard. The voice seemed to fade into the light winds on the mountain. Another hiker, I guessed. A quick glance at the watch told me it was just after 8 p.m. The air in the tent was now cold. I thought that the hiker had come to take my leftovers from dinner. There are such people out there who don't provision enough, and in the olden days, people used to go up the mountain with nothing in the hope of finding food from other hikers. I guess that I'm of that mindset. I think the hiking community is pretty okay with things like this. We accept that it comes with the territory. But I was a little concerned about how much food would be left over, so I poked my head out of the tent. Outside the tent was really dark, but not pitch black. I couldn't see anyone out there, and I couldn't hear anyone either. I thought that I might see someone out there. I thought that I might have heard them pitching a tent nearby perhaps too. But even with the aid of the moonlight, I couldn't see anyone. Then I realized that I didn't see a flashlight when I heard someone bump into my tent. Surely there wouldn't be a person out here with a flashlight. At this point, because the voice I heard was so quiet, I thought that it might have been a little auditory hallucination. Maybe I heard some distant animal bark or something. Then, in that lovely place between consciousness and sleep, I heard something rub against my tent and slightly tap it, just like before. It went on for 30 seconds, and then I heard a voice mutter, "Sorry." Going by the voice, the man sounded to be in his 20s, I guessed. So I replied, "It's okay, don't worry." I slowly unzipped the tent and peeked out. No one there again. Where did you go just now? I just came out to talk to you, I thought. I got a little freaked out at this point, because it was dawning on me that I was in the middle of nowhere, alone and in the dark.
I started to think about all the scary stories I had heard about spirits and strange people on the mountains. The truth is, I was panicking a little. The idea of falling back asleep was long gone now. I weighed up my options, and I thought about packing my stuff up and running. But in the dark, I wouldn't know what direction to go. I might slip and break a leg. Getting lost on the mountains as well didn't seem like the best idea. So I guessed that the only logical thing I could do was wait until sunrise. I was shaking with fear, and I buried my face into the pillow to stop from making sounds. I kept rolling around as well, to stop myself from trembling. Then I heard the tent fabric being depressed from the outside, those familiar taps on the tent, followed by the man's voice. "Sorry." Moments of silence followed. Then the tent rustled again, and the man said sorry once more. This was horrible. I hated it. I told myself just to shut off my brain. I wrapped a towel round my head. At this point, I could only hear my blood pumping in my ears. I listened to my heart rate slow, and I guess I just drifted off. Either that, or I fainted from fear. I wake up and the towel is no longer covering my ears. I look at my watch, and it was just after 3 a.m. My plan was to leave this location at 5 a.m. But since I was awake, I thought that this was as good a time as any to leave. Then, as I was pulling myself out of the sleeping bag, I heard something hit and shake the tent like crazy. "I'm sorry." It scared the hell out of me. It was disturbing that it felt angrier now. Yet the apology sounded weak and muttered still. The tent was continuously being battered now. The metal housing of the tent poles, began to buckle. I had no escape. I can't stay in the tent, and I can't leave the tent. What the hell do I do? I asked myself in a panic. So I just shouted, "Stop!" The banging stopped moments later. This time, I didn't hear a man's voice, so for some reason, that told me that the coast was clear, and I left my smashed-in tent. I started to pack up my things as quickly as I could. There was no damage to any of the things I left outside. Everything was just as I left it. I just grabbed some essentials and I bolt. I go in the direction of the hike I had planned, and I actually climbed that mountain that day. I think I was just determined not to let the experience put me off of what I came here to do. Feeling a lot better about myself, I returned to the campsite much later, just before sundown. I take down my battered tent, not wanting to litter, and as I'm pulling out the tent poles, I hear a voice mutter close to my ear. "I'm sorry." I spun around to find no one there. Later, when I did some research on the mountain, a man not too long ago died there. According to the reports, he died in distress. What a terribly lonely word that is. He died alone, lost in the mountains. Did he find my tent in search of help or perhaps companionship? I couldn't help wonder if it was him who was shaking my tent. Nowadays, when I go hiking or camping, I like to bring salt with me, or something to leave as an offering.